Hi, my name is Doug Johnson. I'm a solution consultant with Acumatica. Today I'm going to be talking to you during this session about project accounting. I'm going to be going over some of the basic features of project accounting and just providing an overview of the system itself and how it can help you manage all the different projects that you might be interested in. To get started, let's review a PowerPoint diagram that shows how project is actually set up within the system. Within Acumatica, there's several different modules. We have a general ledger, accounts payable, inventory management, accounts receivable. Over here, you see the project module. Projects, or job costs, can be kept separately from different modules within Acumatica. Things get passed from the modules themselves to project based on having a specific project code that they can be coded to. It's also possible that you can still have stuff in your regular general ledger without associating with a project. You just enter your standard non-project code, in this case X, and the information stops at the general ledger. The project, once it receives the information, can do different things such as marking it up, just keeping track of whether it's profitable or not, or just completely ignoring it. Now, most of the modules are pretty self-explanatory. You can go in, you can enter a general ledger transaction, and it'll flow through to project. You can also enter a project transaction directly into the project module, and it won't necessarily flow through to the general ledger, but you can just keep it for your project-specific items. The employee portal is a little unique. The employee portal is used for employees to go enter expense claims and timesheets. Obviously, it's hooked into mobile devices and other things as well to make on-the-road entry very easy. So if you're entering time activities or a time card, that flows directly into the project management module. The reason for that is we're assuming that employees are being paid through a third-party payroll solution. The third-party payroll solution will then feed information into the general ledger to make sure that your accounting is kept up to date and that the same transactions that are entered into the timesheet also make their way into project. Now, with the latest release of Acumatica, we do have a payroll module. The payroll module is not shown in this diagram, but it would be similar to a third party. The timesheets would go directly into the project management module, and the payroll transactions would be billed through payroll and passed to the general ledger. The other one about the employee portal is the expense reporting. Expense reporting flows through the accounts payable module. Each employee is treated as a vendor. The employees can then go ahead and get reimbursed for their expenses. As employees are reimbursed, the information is released to the general ledger and then flows through the project. So that way a hotel fee or rental car arrangement or something can be logged against a project or even marked up as necessary. We'll show a little bit more of that once we start doing an actual project in the software itself. Now, you'll also notice that inventory issues can make their way into the general ledger so that you can issue materials to projects, as well as the sales orders and invoices that you issue directly to customers can also be reflected in the project cost. Sales orders and purchase orders are a little more complex because they actually create two transactions which make their way to the project. The purchase order will obviously create an inventory receipt, which will increase your cost of goods sold, but that may also be registered to the project, so it would flow through. In addition to increasing the cost of goods sold, it may go through to the vendor itself for payment, and your payment records would then also make their way through as needed. So that's a little bit about the chalk talk. Let's go into the software itself now to see how we can easily create and set up projects. I'm going to log in as the administrator. The administrator is my person that's going to have access to all the different modules within the system. It's very important that the administrator has that just for this demonstration purposes. In reality, people that log into the system would have specific objects and things that they're allowed to see. Within the system itself, you can see under organization we have projects, time and expenses, and the organization structure. These are three key modules that work together to help people create projects. We'll get into setting up a little bit more later. So let's go in and just do something quickly. We'll create a project. So I'm going to flow through into my projects area. And I'm going to go do a simple thing to create a new project. We'll call this one Demo 2. We'll pick a customer for this. We'll just start typing a name and use our bartending school for this. And we'll also pick a template. In this case, we're going to do a time and materials project. I might add a new description. We can say time and materials for USA bartending. And we'll save our project. Now, the easy part about actually creating a project is only 3 fields are required. So it was very easy for me to go ahead and create that. I created a project ID, a customer, and added a template. If you had a third-party system that wanted to create a project in Acumatica using the Web Services API, it's real simple. You could pass those 3 fields. Now, there's a lot more control that you're going to need over your project, and I'm going to go through some more of the capabilities within the module itself right now. Within the project, we have this general info tab. This is going to set up the starts and end dates. And it also shows, remember we pointed out all those different settings you had. Here's my visibility settings that show up what modules it's available in. So for example, if you didn't want somebody to enter a sales order that relates to this Demo 2 project, simply uncheck it, and then now it's not available. Down here are the default account codes. You could have a specific account code that your project is going to link to, as well as a sub-account code. For my billing period, I'm going to override the template and do on-demand billing. On-demand billing is going to help me in this demo scenario because I can just do bill runs as I need to. The allocation rule is very important. This is going to help figure out how my project is costed. So we'll be doing that and revisiting that in detail a little bit later in the presentation. The billing rule is set up as the default billing rule. In this case, I've just selected the standard one which defaults, as well as the rate table. Once again, you can have multiple different rates with your projects, and that makes it very flexible in terms of customer-specific billing, or if you have billing for a particular class of customers, you can do it that way as well. All these things are very flexible within the system itself. Now, also within this template, it defined a number of tasks. You see that 3 tasks were automatically created by the system: a project management, a senior consultant, and a junior consultant. Those 3 tasks allow people to log their hours against them. So if, for example, I'm a single employee, but one day I'm working on project management-oriented material, I can get billed at a certain rate. If the next day I'm working on a junior consultant task, even though I'm being paid the same by my company, my client will be charged a lower rate for that as a junior consultant. That's just one way we can set up billing. There's multiple different ways of doing it. I can be billed by person, by what I'm working on, by project, and the way the accounting works is virtually endless in terms of how my rate is marked up. Now, each of these individual tasks rolls up to an overall project balance. So you'll notice that what I'm expected for this project is about $8,000 of expenses. These can be modified simply by going into the task and drilling down into the task itself. So example, let's look at the project management task and see what that consists of. The project management tasks has a budget associated with it. In this case, it's just labor. So we have 8 hours of labor. If you wanted to go in and make a minor modification because your project's going to be a little bit longer, you'll notice that this rate is what my employees are expecting to make. This is just for budgeting purposes. Each project and each task can have a budget associated with it. It allows you to be very flexible in terms of what you're expecting to see on your project and keep track of whether projects are over budget in real time. As a web-based system, it's important to note that Acumatica is a real-time system, so as timesheets are approved, these expenses are going to flow through and be able to hit triggers that will keep project managers informed on whether their project's on task and on schedule. So I've gone ahead and I made a minor modification to that budget. I can come back, and now you'll notice that I have a new expense total down here that's a little bit higher. The next thing I'm going to go into, you can see, is there's an Employees tab here. Individual employees can have visibility into the project. In this case, I'm logged in as Maxwell Baker, the administrator, so I have visibility into this project, as well as several other different consultants who might be doing the work on that. I'm going to go ahead and leave these settings as they are. In addition, you could add equipment. Equipment can be things that run in parallel with the project. You can have a machine that runs, that has a setup charge, a runtime charge, as well as a standby rate. All of those things, just like employees can enter time cards, you can have equipment that can enter time cards. This is not the same as issuing a piece of inventory to a project. This is more for a piece of equipment that gets used on a project and then returned and into the inventory later. The activity history will give me a running list of activities associated with my project. And attributes are things that can be assigned at the project level and used in various formulas. In this case, notice that I have an expense markup percentage. I'm going to go ahead and add in something for that, and I'll go ahead and save that. That means that every time I enter an expense report, I'm going to mark that up 10% to my client, USA Bartending School, to create the bill. As we go ahead and run billing, invoices will automatically appear here. And then you'll go ahead into the approval area as we need to, and you'll see if any approvals are needed. In this case, I don't have a project manager, so no approvals are needed. So that's a little bit of an overview of my project. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do like a mock run of my project. For that, I'm going to go to this action, and I'm going to create auto budget. So if I run my auto budget, it's going to simulate the actual project running so that I can check that all my rate tables have been entered, set up correctly, and that my expected revenue is in line with what I'm anticipating for the system itself. It's going to go basically through task by task, pretend it's creating timesheets, and then go ahead and add the totals to the projected revenue for this project. So I'll just give it a second while it does that. As you can see, the project's expecting to make $15,300 on $8,000 worth of expenses. So overall, this seems in line with what I was expecting. Now it's time to go start the project. To start the project, I'm just going to activate my tasks. You can activate all of them at once. You can activate them one at a time. You can have add-on projects or tasks that you add later as changes come in if needed. In this particular case, I'm just going to go ahead and activate all of them. Once I've activated all my tasks, I then click here, and now my project is active. Once the project's active, it means I can log in as different people, and they can enter time and expense reports against this particular project. So let's go ahead and start that process now. We'll go in, and we're going to open up a separate browser here to do that. In this particular case, I'm going to log in as Jane Doe. Jane Doe is a simplified user. Her main goal is to go ahead and do work on projects. As you'll notice, her dashboard is much simplified. So I'm just going to go in here and enter a timesheet. There's different timesheet flows through project. I'm going to be showing one particular flow, which is relatively simple because there's no project approval at the activity level. So I can go through here and enter a particular project. Let's go find our Demo 2 project. And if Jane's going to go enter against the project task, we'll do Junior Consulting Tasks. And she can log time against them. You can set up the system to actually require a complete 40 hours, or you can just set it up to create a warning that 40 hours hasn't been entered. Over here in the description field, you can enter something about the tasks that were done. We'll just enter a simple description in that case. So that's one example of a time entry method. Now there's multiple ways to enter time in the system. You could actually go in and you could enter time based on a simple activity. So each individual activity, like you see here in the Details tab, could be entered and logged against different projects if needed be. You could also go in and modify the descriptions of those. Mine one was just copied over since the Details tab is a mirror image of the Summary tab. As we go ahead and do that, the project activities can get approved individually by the project manager. After the project activities get approved, the next step is to take that and they will automatically be entered to this timesheet. The timesheet can then be approved through a separate process that I'm about to show you now. So I'll go ahead and submit my timesheet. And as I submit, notice the status changes to pending approval. Under the Approval tab, we can see who's responsible for making that approval. The reason this two-tier structure is set up is it allows a workflow by which one person, the project manager, can approve all things related to his project. Then, after everything's been copied to the time card, the employee's boss or somebody within the organization can approve vacation times and other non-project related expenses as it rolls up into a complete weekly timesheet. So that gives a lot of flexibility in terms of how you set that. Now also in terms of workflow, when an approval is required, you can go ahead and make that occur so that you would be able to automatically notify, in this case, Michael Andrews, that a project, or that he has things waiting to occur. Now, Michael Andrews might get annoyed if he's constantly receiving emails on an up-to-the-minute basis if he manages a lot of employees. So you can also actually create a nice dashboard that will inform Michael of when he needs to go approve things. So if there's things that need to be done very frequently, he would just actually have them logged into the dashboard. So we're going to take this recent time card by Jane Doe and we're going to go open it up as Michael Andrews and we're going to go approve it so that it can be sent to the project. So my next step is to approve. At this point, the status of my time card is approved. The notification I talked about, if you wanted to email that to Michael Andrews, you would create a notification up in this area to send an individual email each time something was waiting for approval. I don't have that set up on this particular system. At this point, it's been approved, but Acumatica allows one more check and balance, and that is it can be released. In this case, Michael Andrews also has the power to release it, so I'll go ahead and just release that time card. Releasing it commits it to the financials as well as it makes it available to the project. So referring back to what we see here on our PowerPoint diagram, notice that our time card, once released, actually makes its way down into the project at this point. So now we've got a transaction that has been logged and recorded, approved, and released to my project. I'm going to log out as Michael Andrews, minimize my one browser, Firefox, and now I'm back in my administrator in Google Chrome. When I navigate to the Balances tab, real-time data is displayed showing that the cost of Jane Doe has come through and shows in the expense category. Now, how did this $960 get generated? The budget might not have necessarily been aligned exactly with that. So Jane Doe might not be paid per my budget. So if I go to Organization Structure, Employees, I'm going to open this up in a new tab so we don't lose our place over in Project. And we're going to go to the Jane Doe record and see where these expenses came from. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my employees. And I'm going to grab Jane Doe. And I'm going to go to this Employee Cost tab. At this point, you can see that Jane Doe bills at an hourly rate of $30 per hour. So that's going to be what gets passed through. Now, Acumatica also has the capability to handle salaried employees. So if Michael Andrews, the CEO, was doing some billing, notice that it automatically calculates an hourly rate based on his salary and a 40-hour work week. Now, Acumatica automatically, within Project, accounts for a hard-working employee. So if Michael Andrews bills 60 hours this week, it's going to go ahead and reduce the hourly rate associated with that project. So that will mean that instead of being 72, it'll be 2/3 of that. The other good news is that if he enters less than 40, it'll still carry through that exact 72/12 because he might be entering vacation time or doing other things, so the project doesn't get penalized if he works less than 40 hours a week in this case. So that's a little bit about setting up the employees. It's also interesting to note that on a project-by-project basis, this can be overridden. So down here at the bottom, notice that I can go specify a particular project and set a different hourly rate for that. Maybe you have a project that the employee is going to get paid extra because it's in a hazardous zone or it's in an area where something's not safe or something like that, and there's an additional pay rate. You can go specify all that thing here. So that's a little bit about how to specify how the actual employee cost then makes its way over to the project. If you want to see exactly what made up this 960, we're going to navigate back to our project and we're going to open up this project transactions. Within the project transactions screen, here's the 4 individual project transactions, 8 hours each, that came through from Jane Doe. You can see that each of these is getting hit with a $30 rate. Now here's where things start to get interesting in terms of how I can charge this. There's a box here called allocated. So at this point, the costs have been related to my project. So my project's been absorbed the cost of Jane Doe's payments. However, now I can take what Jane Doe entered. In this case, she entered things as a junior consultant and against this junior consultant task. And she can go ahead, and we can go ahead and actually bill those. Now there's a couple ways you can see all these different fields here that are available to bill off of. We can bill off the task that Jane Doe has entered. We can bill off this account group that's available as part of that project. We can bill based on Jane Doe herself. Maybe she always bills at a particular rate. We could use this field. Or you see there's this thing called inventory ID, which we could also bill as well. So all those different things, the project task, the account group, the employee, and the inventory ID are available to our rating engine. The rating engine can then take this $30 per hour, mark it up, or completely replace it with something new to apply a new rate. All that's done when these transactions get allocated. So let's go talk a little bit more about what's going to happen during the allocation of these transactions. Returning back to my project, you'll notice that each of my tasks can have a different allocation rule. The allocation rules are going to be used to drive several different billing scenarios. You'll notice I have a few loaded into the demonstration data here. I have time and materials with work in progress inventory. I have fixed price projects. I have cost plus projects. And then I also have internal projects. Internal projects don't actually get rebilled. It just keeps track of, as an office move or is internal software development or other internal tasks. It helps you keep track of how much that costs. The cost plus will add a burden. But once again, these allocation rules can be mixed, matched, and you can even have projects that have one component that's fixed price as well as another component that's time and materials. So let's go into one of the time and materials allocation rule to show actually how that sets up. So I'm going to click on my time and materials task. One more brief bit of background about projects. Projects have something called an account group. An account group is an aggregation of individual general ledger codes. The reason this is done is because project managers tend to think in terms of labor, materials, and things along those lines, whereas accountants tend to think in terms of my accounts receivable account, my cost of goods sold account, and different things like that. So while the accountants can think in individual terms of their GL accounts, my project managers can think more in terms of labor, materials, etc., etc. So here's a bunch that have been defined for the demo data. Now once you go in, you can actually say, well, now we're going to take anything that comes through, this is the allocation rule, that matches this account group called labor, and we're going to apply these particular formulas to it. Now notice there's two different ways key ways I can do allocations. I can allocate transactions or budget. Transactions are useful when you're going to come in and mark up a particular individual task, or when you're going to mark up an expense report or things like that that need a markup. Budget is useful if you have a fixed price project. So one of my budget oriented items might be something along the lines of my budget is $30,000, so I'm going to actually rebill $30,000, my exact budget for that line. The budget helps you, as I say, with fixed price type of transactions. You'll also notice that I can do calculations in earlier steps that are used by later steps. So this gives you the ultimate flexibility with how these formulas are created. If I want to go ahead and add a burden to my labor rate ahead of time and then use that burdened labor rate to calculate something else, I can do that. In this particular case, we're going to keep it simple and just take those direct transactions that came through from Jane Doe. Within these calculation settings, you can open up a detailed screen that allows you to do advanced calculations. You can put any mathematical formula you want in here, and notice that you have the capability to select fields from various screens and from various places within Acumatica. In this case, we're pulling off the what's called the PM Tran quantity field. So that's all those project management transactions. Remember earlier we showed the 4 transactions that came through from Jane Doe. So if you go through my project transactions screen, you'll see I can pull a number of different fields off those projects. Now if it's more important that I gather something from my project itself, I can go there as well. So remember, I defined all of my attributes at the project level. So let's see if I can go find one of my attributes here. Here's one for expense markup. So I could use that expense markup I entered in my project. Remember, I entered a 10 for that. I could use that number 10 in my formula here just by clicking that and adding it. So if I wanted to, I could do that. In this particular case, it doesn't make any sense, so we will get rid of it, hit cancel. So that's the quantity. There's a billable quantity. And then here's the amount formula. The amount formula can vary according to what you're doing. In this case, we're going to take the billable quantity, which is the hours billed, and multiply it by a rate we're going to pull from our rate table. The at rate is one very specific parameter that you'll notice exists in this area here. That's going to be a rate that's pulled from your rate table in the billing and allocation in the rate tables, in your project rate tables. So we can go ahead and I'll explain rate tables in just a bit. The description is also very important. In this particular case, the description is going to read the employee name all the time, and if the employee doesn't have an actual name entered, it's going to pull the description. In this case, we might do a little switcheroo in terms of this, and we're going to take the transaction and we're going to put that before here so that we're actually pulling the project transaction that we entered. And then if there's no transaction entered, then we'll use the employee name. And I'll save my rules. So now that we've set up one of our allocation steps, let's take a look at some of the other ones as well as take a look at the allocation settings tab. In the billable materials, I'm going to take different GL codes that are aggregated through this material, through this account group. And in this case, I'm going to take anything that links to material and apply different formulas to it. I can also do that for re-invoicing travel expenses, as well as invoicing subcontractors. Subcontractors is pretty interesting because you can take an AP bill that comes through and you can apply a rate either on a billable amount or quantity formula. In this case, I'm going to take the quantity, which is the actual billable amount from my subcontractor, and mark it up. I could also just take my complete subcontractor bill. In that case, I would use PM Tran quantity, or I'm sorry, amount, and multiply that by my rate. That would be multiplying a specific markup rate to the entire bill as opposed to re-invoicing each individual hour at a specific rate per subcontractor. Now once this amount formula has been calculated, we pass over to the allocation settings to see what to do with that amount. There's a couple different things that can happen. We can take this and we basically create a new general ledger type entry or a new project type entry. A new general ledger entry would be the ability to go in and it's going to take whatever I pass through and it's going to take that amount and place it to project unbilled AR. And then on the credit side, it's going to push it to unrecognized revenue. You'll notice that all my list of GL accounts is available here. As I say, in this case, it's a liability account for unrecognized revenue. These are temporary transactions, or I should say they can be temporary transactions. If I choose to reverse my allocation, either on project billing or invoice release, or never. If it's never, it's a permanent transaction. If I select one of these, when I release my invoice, these transactions are backed out. This helps me keep track of things like things that's in process or work in progress. There is a different process associated with a more formal work in progress. I'll get to that in a little bit. So that allows me to go assign these to different areas. Now in this particular case, this allocation rule is set up so that my revenue recognition is correlated with my billing. You may not always want that to be the case. Acumatica is flexible enough so that you can go in and you can start recognizing revenue with a different allocation rule as your costs come in. That's really important for longer running transactions that have infrequent billing. So for example, if I have a 3 or a 4 month transaction and expenses dribble in, I want to start maybe recognizing some of that revenue immediately. In this case, my allocations would be a little bit different. Instead of going to project unbilled AR, I may just go ahead and recognize this revenue immediately, even though I haven't created the account receivable for it. So that's a little bit about allocation rules. We have several different ones that are part of this that you can take care of. Can't remember if I already showed this or not, so we'll have to edit this out. It's tough when I start getting into multiple takes. I can't remember what I did. Anyway, so let's assume that I already did all those. So now that we're done with our allocation rule, I want to go back and pick up one last thing, which is this billing rule. So I'm going to go right here, open up my billing rule. And you'll see what the billing rule does is it's going to take a particular account group. We wrote everything to this unbilled account group. And it's going to go apply that and create an invoice based on it. The invoice can be sent into specific accounts and accounted for even at the sub-account level. In a case of a standard, this is just taking everything in my unbilled category and rebilling it. I can do other more interesting things if I have the case of a fixed price project. If it's fixed price, notice that I limit the amount so that my revenue account group is the maximum it can contain. There's a lot more advanced classes and schedules that'll teach you more about that. But the idea is that you could actually overbill something if you needed to, unless you set this limiting amount on there. So that's how my allocation rule works. So first I allocate, then I bill. That's the complete end of would be the end of my project after it's been done. So now that I've gone ahead and I've shown you a little bit about how Jane Doe's information has flowed through, let's go ahead and start that allocation. Now, as with many things in Acumatica, these allocations can be run from a specific screen that's scheduled to occur on a regular basis. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and do it manually. So I'm going to go ahead and click my Demo 2, and I'm going to go ahead and allocate them as of this posting date. This is going to go through and it's going to take our 4 transactions. It's going to mark them up according to the task that Jane Doe did. So let's go in now and go back to our project and see where we stand. So notice now that we've taken our 960 and we've marked it up according to the task that Jane Doe performed. If I wanted to, I can go into this project transactions area and get a little more detailed look at that. So you'll notice the description here is an allocation. These are my allocated transactions. It allocated it, as I'll get to in a second, based on rate tables that were set up and based on my allocation rules. The allocation rules in this case took this project task called Junior Consulting, which has a rate of $100 associated with it, and marked each of those up. So that's how we arrived at the total. Also notice that it's now allocated. These are marked as allocated transactions. If I noticed an error in the process and I'm not happy with my allocation, I can simply go here and reverse allocation, change things within my setup, and then rerun that. No harm or no foul has been created at this point because you can actually go in, nothing's been billed or created at that point. All this is within the project management module. So now I've got everything that's ready, that's been allocated. The next stage is to actually go ahead and bill it. I'll come back to the rate tables in just a second, but I want to get through the billing first. Now, billing can also occur on an individual basis, so I could go into my specific project itself and run project billing. As I said, the other option you have is to run project billing from here, where you can run project billing for all your individual tasks or for your individual projects. In this case, I'm going to do it this way. We'll just go ahead and run project billing. Now, as I run project billing, an invoice should be created. The invoice is going to be set here, and it's going to be, in this case, for the 3,200. So I'm going to go view my invoice. And the invoice is going to break things out on a line item by line item basis, depending on how I aggregated my transactions. In this case, I chose to pass through each individual transaction to my bill, but I could have merged all of these into a single transaction in the allocation step had I chosen to do that. Let's go take a quick look at that. I forgot to talk about that quickly during the allocation step. So we're going to go back and do one more allocation rule, show the time and materials. Down here in allocation settings, notice here's where you can aggregate things. If I had aggregated things by employee, I would have gotten one line for those 4 transactions. If I had done it by date and entered different things on the same date, obviously that would be done. Vendors are more for other things such as expense reports, etc. All right, so let's go back once again and review our bill. So now you'll go ahead and see our bill. Once again, if you're not happy with this bill, you can simply delete it and then rerun it. If you need to, there's many advanced features. So if you need to say, well, my customer is a little leery of getting, since I selected bill on demand, they're really not expecting a bill for this much at this point in time. So I can select the bill later option. That will mean this line item will still be set up within Acumatica, but it won't actually go ahead and bill it, so it can be billed on a future bill. The report is obviously here. This will show what it's going to actually look like on your invoice. This can be completely customized per customer so that each individual client of yours can get a complex or simplified bill depending on their individual client needs. That's really important for a lot of project-oriented businesses. So there's how that would look. Obviously, I don't have a logo in my particular image, so that you get a little bit of a red mark there, but normally that would show the logo of your particular instance. This is just a report that can be simply modified and changed as you need to do it. Now, one of the things that you would expect is you'd say, well, shouldn't I have now released my revenue recognized all my revenue? That doesn't happen until we actually go ahead and release this invoice. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to release it to the actual customer. We could also email in the process. Part of the workflow would involve emailing this or printing it and sending it to the customer. Now remember, part of what I set up in my allocation rules was the ability to reverse out those allocation steps and the allocation amounts when I released my invoice. So now that I've released my invoice, I expect to go back to my balances, do a quick refresh, and notice that I now have zeros in my unbilled and unrecognized revenue, and my revenue has been now moved down to a partially completed project. That concludes some of the basics behind just getting a project through the system. Now let's go into a little bit more detail about how those rates were calculated. Within Acumatica, we have a very advanced rate setup and allocation process. So we're going to go into this rate lookup rules. I'm going to oversimplify this just to get through it fairly quickly. We can have different rate tables. I'm going to pick my standard rate table. And I think this was the rate table that we used for that last project that we just entered. So notice that I can have different sequences. Acumatica is going to drop through each sequence, and it's going to apply a rate depending on what that sequence is. So let's say I wanted to add another one down here, some other sequence. And I don't want this one to be dependent on my project task, but this would be, maybe I want an employee always to bill at a particular rate. So now I'm going to go ahead and save that. So now I'm going to actually go to the rate table itself. I'm going to keep this screen open, and I'm going to go ahead into my rate table in a new tab. So I'm going to pull up my exact same rate table that you just saw before. And now you'll notice I have my new sequence. So Acumatica goes through these sequences, and it's going to drop down, and it's first going to go to the first sequence it encounters, which is project management tasks. So it comes down and it says, if the criteria associated with this task is true, apply a rate of $200 per hour. The task is 1:01 p.m. Remember, that was one of the tasks available, but Jane Doe did not bill time to that. So when we went to apply a rate, it skipped this step. The next step was senior consultant tasks. There's a couple different tasks. It also ignored those. This is where Jane billed her time again. So as soon as it met this criteria, it said, aha, I need to use the effective date and apply the rate on the effective date of this particular sequence. Now, one of the things that I wanted to show is that by adding this new one with different criteria, keep your eye on these tabs as I select the 301. In this case, I can go enter a new rate. And I can make it an effective rate. Let's just say we're going to do 90 an hour for this particular area. Oops. And we'll hit save. And then now I can start adding employees. So if I wanted to, I can go add Jane Doe to that list. And I could also add several other different employees. Now keep in mind that Jane Doe has already logged her time against this junior consultant task. So it's never actually going to drop down and get to that new task we created unless I had entered a code of 250, in which case it would check to see if it's Jane Doe. It would have applied the 90 rate before it got down to that. So that's a little bit of a teaser about the rate tables. The rate tables get very involved based on what you've selected here in terms of these fields. Within the rate tables, you'll notice that we've created in the standard demo data. We've created a number of different ones that you can look at and play with. So for example, for our materials, we have just a single markup rate where we go and we mark up all our materials by 20%. And in that case, we use the account group. So anytime it matches the account group of material, we're going to apply a 1.2 markup percentage to that. So that should give you a little bit of an idea of how to do different markups. So we've taken a project and showed some basic information going through on that project. We've also showed a little bit now about how to get more complex rate tables. The last thing I want to do, well, one of the things I want to do is I want to go through and enter some different ideas and show you how the different modules interact with project. So let's go in. We'll go in as Andrews because he can approve his own stuff and prevent a few extra log in and log outs. And Michael Andrews is going to go enter an expense report that's associated with this project. Now, once again, I would probably be doing this from a mobile device or something a little more exciting than what I'm showing here, but for illustrations in this video, we'll just go with this process. So we'll say expenses for demo 2 project. Save. Now I also have the option of entering my customer here if I want to. That'll help me narrow down what's available. And I think we're going to get to do a little troubleshooting on behalf of this because I don't think I allowed my dear friend Mr. Andrews to see this particular project. So you'd go ahead and enter that. Here you can decide whether it's billable or not. That's up to the employee, or it can be done automatically based on certain criteria or overridden by the person reviewing the expense claim. And lo and behold, Michael Andrews does not have access to that project. So we're going to go back to our project for demo 2, and we're going to see if we can add Mr. Andrews. Get myself into trouble here. All right, so now we've added Michael Andrews to the project. I may have to do some refresh here. And now we can actually go ahead and get that. Michael Andrews can log this expense report against different tasks. In this case, you'll notice this expense account. Notice that here's my GL account. It's also linked to my account group called Travel. I forgot to explain earlier that it's important to note that this is where, remember when I said different GL accounts can map to different project accounts? That can all be set up within the general ledger or within the actual area of the projects. Now we could go through and add some more detail. In this case, we'll just do a simple expense claim and leave it at that. So now I'm going to go ahead and submit that. And I will go ahead and approve it. And I'll go ahead and release it. Reaping the benefits of being the head honcho here. Now, as that gets released, it's going to make its way into the project module and show up as an expense, in this case, a $200 expense against the material line of my project. So if I go back here to my Balances tab and do a refresh, you can see there's my $200. Now my tasks and expenses will be marked up in a little bit of a different way. They're going to be marked up 10% when I do an allocation based on this particular travel and expense line. I'm not going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to show a couple other things real quickly here as well. One of the other things I wanted to show is how you can issue inventory to this project. Now notice this is a particular project that's more for it's more geared around professional services, so there might not be any materials. It doesn't matter that we haven't budgeted for any. I can still issue materials to that project. To do that, I'm going to go to Distribution, Inventory, and I'm going to go to Issues. I'm going to open that in a new tab so once again I don't lose my place. In this particular case, I'm going to issue some laptop computer to demo 2 project. Pardon my typing. I'll go into my inventory, pull out a laptop computer from inventory, and enter one of them. Now, I have to go over here, of course, and say which project it's associated with. And then, once again, the task is not too critical. I'll just log it against there. That's the description. And I'll go ahead and hit Save. Take it off Save. Now it's in the balance state. Once again, these could all be approved and done by different people in your organization. I'm just going to, as the administrator, I'm just going to push it through. And then release. Now notice that there's a unit price here. The important part to capture about this is the actual inventory cost associated with my inventory ID. So even though I see a price of 500, it's this cost number that I'm expecting to see now attributed with my project. So if I come through and refresh my project balance, let's try that again. I expect to see a material line with that logged against it. Aha. So you get to learn from my mistakes. So I've released a transaction. I did not specify an actual accounting transaction associated with this, the reason code. Within Acumatica, you can have different reason codes that would be reasons for things that were issued. In this particular case, my reason code was give this to the project, but it's just a freebie for the project. So let's go ahead and try this again. We're going to go ahead and issue 2 laptops to, I would actually go through and actually reverse that out at this point and do a inventory, by doing an inventory receipt and receive that back in order to clear those transactions out. You are not going to see that. in this particular case. And do a lap. Come on. And issue one of my laptops. We're going to do 2 of them this time. We're going to select a reason code of project, meaning we're issued it to a project. We're going to select the demo, and we are going to pick that out. Take it off hold, save, release, and go back to our project. And now we'll see 2 of these issued to our project. So now we have a new material line with our new costs involved. I can also go in and do expense reports, materials, and then I can also have sales orders and direct subcontractor invoices. Let me do a quick subcontractor invoice, and then we'll go ahead and run some more allocations and run another bill. So I'm going to go to enter my subcontractor invoice. I'm going to go into finance. I'm going to go into accounts payable and enter just a plain bill. Once again, referring back to PowerPoint, notice that we've showed so far how to use Employee Portal to feed time and expenses. We've also gone in, showed issuing inventory directly. So now we're kind of in the AP module showing how that process works. I think I've created a couple vendors. I think there's some vendors in the demo data that are well suited to subcontracting. Let's see if I can find some of those. Might be one of my 1099s. Here's a project vendor. The importance of picking the correct vendor is when I go ahead, the accounts that are automatically set up on this vendor, so if I click my little pencil button here, you're going to see that there's, associated with this vendor, there's specific GL accounts. In this particular case, the expense account is subcontractors, which, as I mentioned before, is linked to this account group called subcontracting. That's going to help you make sure that it actually gets through and marked up correctly. From the usage perspective, it's really simple. All I do when using the system is select a vendor and everything else happens automatically. From a setup perspective, you need to make sure all that's in place. So now we're going to say project 2 expenses from vendor vend 1. Now I have a couple of options at this point. I can go in and select specific inventory IDs. So for example, in this case, let's say I want to have some consulting charges. I can do a senior consultant. That'll help log this as a senior consultant markup, and they're going to do 8 hours of senior consulting work. Now this is the cost to me, so they may be billing me, let's say, just make something up, we'll say 70 an hour. And now I'm going to go ahead and link that to my Demo 2 project. And I'm also going to link it to a particular project task. And these are other fields that are related, but in this case I don't need to do it. I could also, of course, attach my vendor bill and do things along those lines. Now that I've gone ahead and I've created that bill, the vendor bill mapped to my labor item. If I wanted to see how that came through, I'd go in and I'd view my labor balances. And I link this to senior consulting. So I'm going to view my transactions there. And notice that here's my 8 hours of senior consulting work done by my consultant. So all that's made its way through to my project as well. Now, the reason it happened the way it did was because I went and I specified this senior consultant inventory ID. The senior consultant inventory ID is associated with this GL account called cost of goods sold, salaries and wages, which is linked to a labor account group. So I'm going to go enter another vendor bill from the same vendor that's going to get coded a little bit differently right now. So let's go add another one. We're going to still pick our project vendor because we know that that person is a subcontractor. And we're going to say subcontractor markup for project, for demo 2 project. And we're going to go ahead and hit this one. Now this time I'm not going to specify of inventory ID. And we're going to go in and we're just going to add an extended cost of $1,000. Now, as usual, I'm going to have to go in and make sure I specify my project, as well as the project task, which is not so critical in this case. And now we're ready to go ahead and save that transaction. So this is a new bill that we've gotten from the same vendor, except instead of specifying a specific hourly rate, this one's just going to be sent through as a markup. So I'm going to go ahead and release this. And as I release this, it's going to, once again, it's going to make a payable for this particular contractor. And over in my project area, I'm expecting to see $1,000 of subcontractor expenses. So that gives you an example. That concludes the example of sending multiple different transactions through to a project. The last step involved in all of this, we could once again go ahead and run a project allocation if we wanted to. This would allocate several different of those transactions we had just performed into our final bill. And then the last part, of course, was we could go back to the project itself and run the final bill for it. The final bill is going to pick up a lot of those other different expenses that we had just created that would be associated with it. And we can go in and take a look at a few of those. There's my 2 laptop computers, my nights at La Quinta, my project consultant that was entered as a subcontractor as an hourly senior consultant rate, and my one that was just entered specifically as a single charge. So now that I've got that, that showed you a little bit about how to find out what's going on within your project. The other important thing to do is to go in and figure out, how do I get reports out of all this? How do I find information that's going to pertain to me and help me keep an eye on things? Within the demo data, we've got this project dashboard, which is just kind of a key to take a look at several different projects. So now we're going to go take a look at where this dashboard was created from. In this particular case, it came from a generic inquiry in my system customization and generic inquiry section. So if I go into my inquiries, you can see I have something here called project status, where I pulled off a couple of fields and did some calculations with my results grid. So that's one way you can get information about project transactions. You can also go in and use the financial report writer to get information. So if I go into the general ledger and go to my analytical report writer, you'll notice that we have a project report here where we specify a row set and a column set that are going to detail things by my project. I'm going to request this for a specific project. So we're going to go ahead and actually, I could have done this at runtime, but I'm going to specify it as a default. So all I have to do is hit preview, accept my default values, and run it. So this is going to show me some of the information about my P&L for my project on a monthly basis. Now, I did most of my work within the current month, so my P&L is not necessarily that interesting as a long-term project. You will notice, however, that there's this junior consultant task that happened in February of this year, a couple months ago. The reason for that is Jane Doe was a little delinquent in filling out her timesheets. So she actually, when I filled out that timesheet, it had a February time frame. So the cost associated with that got attributed to February. In either case, you can see that we've come through, and at this point of the project, we've just about broken even as an aggregate. So that concludes the module associated with project accounting. I hope you found this interesting. Some more details and more detailed educational classes are available through the university if you want to go through and dive down in a much deeper way into project. All the information that you've seen here is available in the demo data set, as well as scripts that are available. Within the PowerPoint that's available on the partner portal, you can go down into your project section. So if I look down here under project accounting, and I can see under here is a quick project demo. So if you like what you saw and wanted to repeat it and follow along with a little step-by-step guide, here's information on how to do that. If you want to go down and get more information, more detailed information about projects and other specific project steps, those are later on in the project area. You can see how to do project-specific template setup and other information about demonstration components you can show. Thanks for listening, and be with you next time.